The movie begins in the city of Bikini Bottom, and Sandy was excited to start her day. Then she whistles to call her horse, and they are on their way to start their adventure. She starts singing that her name was Sandy, and that she is a marine biologist who was born in Texas. So she moved to the ocean to continue her research, and that she liked to make many kinds of inventions, because every day there were things to discover, and that there was nothing better than scientific treasures, but that sometimes it was too lonely, and that she would like to go back to be with her family. Then Spongebob says that he has been practicing, and that he learned some tricks to catch jellyfish. But suddenly, we see an alarm go off, and they are being attacked by some kind of machine. Sandy realizes that they were in trouble, and they leave at high speed to get out of the city. Then they notice that they are attacking the city, and everybody starts running to try to get away. We start to see that they were scared because of the trouble in the city, and Spongebob was crying because he lost his friends. Sandy begins to investigate to look for those responsible, and manages to realize that they had been taken to a laboratory in Texas, while Spongebob was still sad because they took the city, and he begins to cry because he would miss his friends. So Sandy says that she will investigate what happened, and calls the scientists to ask about the city. But suddenly, they hear about a water park, and disconnect the call so she wouldn't continue investigating. Sandy starts to say that they are going to visit the laboratory and that they will return home to save their friends. We start to see that they are on their way to save their friends and that they use a volcano to get to the surface. Then she uses her helmet to change her clothes and they get on a plane to continue their adventure. But suddenly we see that Spongebob had been dehydrated and Sandy uses his invention to get him back to normal. After 14 hours, they are still flying in the plane, and Spongebob is remembering that he had lost his friend, while Sandy was figuring out how to get to the lab, and they jump out of the plane to continue their adventure. We begin to see them speed off falling through the clouds, and Spongebob was amazed by his friend's abilities. Sandy realizes that they modified the lab and built a water park so people would come, but suddenly we see that they are being attracted by a giant tornado and had been thrown far away from the lab. Sandy manages to land safely, and we see that only his friend had been hurt. Then Spongebob had been dehydrated again, and they use the plants to get him back to normal. Sandy realizes that they are too far away and that it would take days to walk back. While in the lab, the city was trapped inside a capsule, and everyone was scared. Mr. Crab says that they are far away from the ocean and volunteers to get out of the restaurant. We begin to see that he is walking to investigate the city and manages to realize that they had been trapped. So he runs off to go back to the restaurant and says that they were trapped by some kind of giants. While the scientists ask the computer for the inhabitants of the city and says that Sandy was missing along with her friend the sponge. But suddenly we see that their boss had arrived and she starts to complain that they were missing. We return to the desert and they were still on their way to get to the lab. But suddenly they hear that they were being followed and manage to realize that it was a team of snakes. Sandy starts to spin around to put on his uniform and they were getting ready to start the battle. We begin to see that she is fighting to defeat the snakes and that she was defeating them so they stop bothering them. But suddenly we see that she ends up being bitten and that she had been defeated because of their poison. So Sandy says that they were in trouble and starts whistling for help, with which she manages to call her family and they begin to prepare to defeat the snakes. We begin to see that they are fighting against the bandits and that they manage to defeat them to save Sandy. Then they get into the vehicle to continue their adventure and we find out that they work at the circus. The family is on their way to continue their performances and they say they were happy for Sandy's return. She starts to say that they didn't come to play and that they were on a mission to save their friends. While at the lab, the boss was angry that they lost the sponge because he is the main piece for their new business. Then they play the video of the phases of the project and they plan to modify the species to be the perfect pets. We go back to the road and Spongebob was talking with Sandy's brother, but suddenly we see that their car starts to break down and they work as a team to fix the problem. While Sandy is remembering when she used to work in the circus and that it was a lot of fun to be part of the shows. Her mother starts to say that she always thought her daughter would inherit the circus and that it had been started by her grandmother's idea. To which Sandy says that she has always preferred science and that she was the first squirrel to live in the ocean. To which her parents say that it doesn't matter what she decides and that they will always love her as long as she stays in Texas. We go to the lab and Plankton is amazed by the scientist's inventions because his cloning machine had not worked and he wants to steal it to have his own army. While in the restaurant, Patrick was scared because he thinks it's a nightmare. Then they open the capsule to feed the fish, and everyone runs excited because it was free food. We started to see that they were gaining weight because of the food, and they take them out of the fish tank to start the experiment. Then they take them to the machine to start the next phase and start using them as test subjects. They begin to say that they were out of the water and that they had been modified to breathe on the surface. But suddenly we see that the children had arrived and they begin to use them as their new toys. We go back to the road and Spongebob was asking how to make the family whistle. But suddenly they hear that they were being followed by a police car and Sandy was angry that they would ruin their mission. We start to see them speed off to escape the police and they end up falling off a cliff. But they manage to be saved by the giant tornado and we see that the police hadn't given up. Sandy starts running to use a rope and succeeds in stopping the tornado to get back to the road. Later, they realize that they were still being followed and had been surrounded by police vehicles. So their father says they would help them escape and they use a cannon to get them away from the police. Sandy starts to say that they were close to the lab and they manage to land in the water park. Then they use binoculars to search for the lab and begin to be followed by the scientist's puppy. So they decide that they would jump from the top and we see that the puppy had been stopped by a park attraction. They then use the pipes to infiltrate the lab and were still being followed by the little dog. We begin to see that they are running to get to the lab and had been ejected through one of the pipes, where we can see that there was Bikini Bottom and that Patrick realizes that his friend had arrived. But suddenly we see that he ends up being captured and that Sandy realizes the scientist's plans. Sandy begins to claim that she has always been a disgrace to the other scientists. The scientist is thankful that she brought the sponge and begins to be attacked to make her leave her friends. So she decides that she would leave her in a cage, and the scientists confess that they had been bribed. We start to see that they turn on the machine to clone Spongebob and that they want to sell him to every child in the world. Then she begins to tell us that when she was a little girl she loved her pet very much and that it ended up dying when she brought it to the surface. So she decided that she would travel the world and that she modified her body because she was attacked by piranhas. Then she starts to thank for her scientific inventions because she was being used to spy on Bikini Bottom. Sandy was sad that it's all her fault and that she couldn't do anything to save her friends. We start to see that they are using the machine to clone the sponge and that was causing it to be the end of his existence. But suddenly we see that the puppy had arrived and hits the machine to free the sponge. Then he goes on his way to meet Sandy and starts motivating her to save their friends, while the scientists were sorry for becoming evil and help Sandy to beat the scientist. We start to see that she is fighting against the evil scientist and manages to defeat her using some cables, with which she manages to make the head fly off and she has merged with her mutant pet. While the sponges start to merge back to normal and we see that he was happy because he was back. Then Sandy says they need her family and she can't whistle because she was missing a tooth. So Spongebob decides that he has to try and manages to do the whistle to get her family to arrive. We start to see that they are working as a team to move the city and that they manage to get them to the ocean. Then they begin to celebrate that they saved the city and they move the circus to the Krusty Krab. As a last scene, it shows the performance of Sandy's family and she was happy for her life in the ocean. This is how the movie ends. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment on what more movies you would like to see on the channel.